Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Walls Can Speak, Making Learning Visible in Social Studies. This series is brought to you by the National Council for the Social Studies. It's the largest professional association in the country devoted solely to social studies education, and you should check out their summer programs, the online and in-person events. You can go to socialstudies.org/professional development, upcoming summer programs, and take a look at just some of the ones that they have to offer. The webinar is also brought to you by InquireEd. InquireEd supports teachers with high quality instructional materials that make joyful, rigorous, and transferable learning possible for every student. Our social studies curricula, Inquiry Journeys, K-5, and middle school world history are used across the country to help students build deep content knowledge and develop the inquiry skills essential for a thriving democracy. Now, just a few things to note. The chat is active, and let me see if I can fire it up there. Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're from and what your role is. I love it to see who is here today joining us to dig into this topic with us. So why don't you all fire up the chat and share with us. Great. We've got Florida, District of Columbia, Texas, keep them coming, Los Angeles, the East Coast of Canada, Ohio. They're coming too fast for me now. But keep sharing. It's great to hear where you're coming from and what your role is in the educational landscape, New Mexico and Maryland. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope no matter where you're coming from or your role, you're going to get something out of what we're talking about today. And I think that you probably will because our panelists, we've got two of them that are going to be joining us, and I want to introduce Lakeithia. Hey, Lakeithia, can you turn on your camera and join us?
Hello,
Hey, Lakeithia, how you
hello.
doing?
Hi. Hi, Martin.
I'm gonna introduce you. You began your journey as an educator at Teach for America in Brooklyn, New York. Later, Lakeithia was a founding teacher of three different schools before becoming a teacher leadership coach for the New York City Department of Education, where she led teacher teams through rounds of inquiry action research. And to grow her skills as a leader, she earned an MEd in educational leadership. Lakeithia's enthusiasm for inquiry as a vehicle for learning grew as a finalist in the New Venture Fund and New School competitions. She joined the InquireEd team in 2021 to marry her passions for coaching and inquiry. So, how's it going today, Lakeithia?
Going really well. Thanks for having me here, Martin. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So, right from the top, we decided to go for the seemingly simple, I'll say that, but memorable definition for visible learning, learning that is seen, shared, and shaped over time. And I know we're going to dig into all of that, but can you unpack it just a little bit right now for us?
Yep, sure. Just like you said, we'll break it down even further throughout this webinar. But in general, visible learning is about making the process of learning public and accessible. And I really love that word accessible because that really makes the classroom more democratic. And it also allows students to see their ideas evolve, share thinking with others, and shape their understanding over time. Again, these words over time. This is not a one and done, it's over time. And it really turns the classroom walls into tools, students into investigators. And I like to think of it as like really the classroom space being like another arm or another limb, another tool in my toolbox of teaching strategies.
That's great. And I love that too because it's like it's more about the process than it is the product.
Yep, we're emphasizing process over product. So it's not just about a polished final result like a bulletin board. It's more about capturing the messiness of learning. It's about the journey of learning. It's about students reflecting. It's about students revising. It's about students revisiting as they go. And with that in mind, I actually have a question for you all that I want to ask. What is one way that student thinking is already visible in your classroom, or one way you'd like it to be? And Martin has a couple of ideas or options that he can share in the
Yeah,
screen.
I pulled these from things that we use. A lot of them we use in our curriculum. A lot of them people I'm sure are familiar with. But when we're talking about these protocols, I thought it was good to have a list for maybe you to look at really quickly and think about maybe one of these, or but like what's one general way that it's visible in your classroom out there, or something that you don't like you want it to be later. Interactive word walls, wonder walls. I see. Displaying word clouds generated from students' responses, thinking maps. I noticed that one, like, some of them are digital tools too, Lakeithia. Like, it doesn't just, I
Mhm.
guess, I think that we have a lot of teachers, some teachers on from Florida virtual schools. So, how do you make learning visible when it's in the digital space? I'm sure there are many different ways that they're finding. Padlet,
Yep.
I see, I think, I wonder. Graphic organizers. Yes, you are welcome. There are virtual teachers out there, and we definitely want to include you. And I think that no matter what medium you're teaching in, finding a way to make student learning visible is so important. Thanks so much. Could we see the list again? Absolutely. Um, Anchor charts, inquiry walls. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. KWL, T charts, Venn diagrams, gallery walks with reflection tools, jigsaw share outs with posted takeaways. How many people live with post-it notes all over their room? We should buy stock in post-it notes because we use them so much at Inquire Ed too. It's great. Thank you so much for sharing some of these things. And right now, I would like to bring on our other panelist, Hannah. Hannah Berkowitz is a fifth grade teacher at Jane Stenson Elementary. Hannah, how are you today?
Hi everyone. I'm great. What a crowd. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. And I can see, actually, I see behind you the inquiry wall. That is so great.
Yes, I had
Um,
my desk a slight bit so everyone could see.
that's awesome. Hannah, I would float that question that we asked the audience to you as well. So what, Hannah, are you finding yourself doing a lot of making learning visible? What are you using, and how would you like to maybe even extend that even more?
Well, I always like to think of my classroom at the beginning of the year as a place that students and I co-create together. So I try to keep a lot of like open wall space and, opportunities for their work to become part of our kind of classroom, not just decor though, part of the learning and kind of something that we can refer to and talk about over time. It struck me right now because we're in testing season. I had to take down so much stuff. And I was like, wow, the classroom doesn't feel like the same space. I had anchor charts that had all like, student strategies up there. And then of course, I didn't have to take this inquiry wall down, thank goodness, because doesn't have math on there. And then I have student work, essays and poems that they've written, and then always like fun things that they've given me as well that kind of make the classroom feel like it's ours and that the students it's theirs. They have ownership over this room.
Yeah, that's got to be really great. And to even see that journey, maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, to see it go from bare walls to something that's, oh, like we created this space around us. That has to be a real feeling of ownership. I want to dig in with both of you, Lakeithia, just about that. Like, if we break down our definition, our simple definition, seen, shared, and shaped, like when we talk about learning that is seen, and there's some examples of an anchor chart and another student created um, piece of learning, artifact of learning. I wonder if I mean, it seems pretty obvious what we're talking about, right? Like something is seen. But can you break that down for us a little bit? Is it maybe not so obvious?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is and it isn't, because seen clearly is about the student thinking, being visual, on the anchor charts and the inquiry walls, the vocabulary walls. It's not hidden in workbooks, it's present, it's public, and it's part of the learning environment. But the way I also consider it not being so obvious, because I was recently on watching a webinar from Dr. Zaretta Hammond, and she said something that really, really struck me. She said, sometimes we see, it was something like, sometimes we see well-run classrooms, beautiful classrooms where students aren't actually learning. And so learning being visible is not just simply a beautified space with like perfection. It's about us having evidence of cognitive engagement, not just beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's obvious and it isn't.
So we're not talking like about Pinterest perfect walls.
You know what? I love Pinterest. I use it for a lot of things. I'm not going to hate on it. I mean, I've definitely beautified my home using Pinterest. But what we're focused on here is the everyday functional stuff. And so visible learning is often messy. It's often in progress, and it's practical, and it's there to support learning, not just decorate the room. And she talked about in that webinar, like students really learning to learn. And so making the learning visible helps students to develop that metacognition, helps them to strengthen their problem-solving strategies and their persistence. So it's not just about, again, that end product, it's about the process that's becoming visible. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once it is visible, what's the if it's not about decoration, right? It's not just for decoration. What does it actually provide for students, that just the fact that that their learning is visible? What is that? I mean, we'll talk a little bit later about the process that gets it there, but once it's there, why does it matter?
Well, I think it matters. We know it matters because Hannah was told to take it down before assessment, right? So, like, first of all, it's giving students a reference, right? Something they can return to as they build knowledge. It's also a tool. It provides scaffolds for all students, but especially our multilingual learners or students who can benefit from visual cues. I would also say that it reinforces the idea that their thinking matters and deserves to be seen, and it builds confidence and ownership. Like, we are all, like Hannah was saying at the beginning, like, we're building this together, we're all a part of the classroom, like we matter in this space. And once again, reinforcing this perfection piece, it doesn't have to be polished. And I think sometimes when we are teachers, we are often evaluated based on what our rooms look like. I know I remember when I was an early teacher, I had a principal who would walk through and just like kind of check off all the things that were supposed to be on my wall. But what does it matter if it's not actually there for student learning? And it's
Hannah, I'm going to turn that same sort of questions to you. I would love to hear your thoughts both about like the perfect display versus like the messy functional display, but then also like the uses. I had a chance to visit your classroom. Thank you so much for letting me visit. And I saw a lot of students going and interacting with things on the wall. I know that you have multilingual learners in your classroom. I heard you engaging with some of them in Spanish. I would just like to hear about like your both the picture perfect versus the messy, and then like how is it being used, maybe even specifically for multilingual learners?
Yeah, well, when I was thinking about discussing visible learning, I think that it's not about, like Lakithia said, it's not about how perfect it looks. It's about how usable it is, how valuable it is for learning. And I also think there's a part there where it's not necessarily obvious to students that, like, if you just put an anchor chart or a poster or their work up, they may not know that that's there for them. And so sometimes as the teacher, we actually need to make that really explicit. Like, we created this together because it's there for you, to support you when you aren't sure what to do next. You can't remember the word that we've been talking about, or you forgot, you know there's a word, like specifically for my multilingual learners or my newcomer students, we discuss the vocabulary, but they often need repeated exposure. So there's a lot of value to having that word up there. They can browse it, yes, while they need it, but also whenever they're just in the classroom, that their learning is in their face, and it sticks more because it's there for them.
Yeah. There seems to be something too, I think maybe students who are struggling with, maybe students struggling with completing their work for various reasons, or maybe students that are new to a classroom, or students that are having executive functioning difficulties. Like, instead of me being the organizer and record keeper and needing to find where I filled that out, and or maybe I didn't fill out, it's there for me. So there's something that is about equity in that, or differentiation maybe too. Lakithia or Hannah, can you comment on that?
Hannah, why don't you take it, and then I'm going to respond to something.
Yeah, I think definitely, well, it's a record of what we've done together. And yeah, again, we may have our students, write down what we have written down, or, they might be copying the same worksheet that we have done. But instead, if we make it into something that's up there that we all did together, I think you're right. That has, an accessibility piece. I know that some of my students, they can't copy as fast as anyone else. So if we instead just do it together, again, that makes it more accessible, more equitable for everybody, because we are combining our knowledge instead of, just saying like who can write faster or copy what I'm writing faster, I guess.
I'm also thinking about like the actual accessibility of like a physical thing. Because somebody just asked in the chat too, like, what happens when you don't actually have a lot of physical space, but you still want to make thinking visible? And so I was just thinking about like those little trifold boards, or those like little tabletop like boards that can go on the table that can show that they could post questions or add to with Post-it notes, or using clipboards or easel pads or hanging folders, like different ways to actually make it even physically accessible. I was someone who thankfully had a lot of physical space in my classroom, and I would often make the charts, like put them on Velcro so that they could take them down and put them back up, so that they're actually like able to physically use them and then put them back.
That's cool.
Can you respond to that too, Hannah? Because I was in your room. There's a lot of stuff. You have stuff on your windows, like you have anchor charts on your windows, things like that. So when a lot of the space is so we're social studies teachers here, and when a lot of the space is relegated to math and to ELA, finding space for social studies, any secret strategies to finding extra wall space?
I don't know if I have secret strategies, except that it's always going to be about what's the priority, or, you're always going to be asking yourself. So I find that the inquiry wall is like, it's so valuable to I want it there. And so I may have to choose that over having all the anchor charts from literacy up at all times. So I have mine like kind of on like, they can like pull them up and look at past ones instead of keeping all of them up at all times. So it's more like, I don't know, like a Rolodex that's of learning. And I mean, I just kind of try to maximize the whole wall. I get on a chair all the time and stick something up there. So it's there for students. For some not specific to social studies, I have taken pictures and then made them smaller and they're in student notebooks. So that's not around all the time, but it can be like a collection of charts that we've made together.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that, we talk a lot about is like anchor charts. There's clearly a lot of them in your room there, and that creation moment, right, is really, 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 really important. And I want to get to that when we get to learning that is shared. So there you are, live, working on an anchor chart with the students. Lakithia, talk me through this second part, learning
Okay.
that is shared. Because we're talking about how, I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but we're talking about how those charts get there.
Yep. So when learning is shared, the students are active participants. So they're building the tools that support their own learning. I'm going to keep referencing Dr. Hammond because I just love her so, but she says only the learner learns. And that just really reminds us that learning isn't something we do to students. It's something we do to support them in doing the doing. It's about empowering them to do the doing, right? And so in the anchor chart you showed earlier, if that meets this definition, it's not made in advance. It's co-constructed during a discussion with the teacher, capturing student ideas in the moment. Or maybe it's built by a group during an investigation or after a share out. And I feel like it's the same thing for things like a vocabulary wall. I remember when I was, an early teacher, that was one of the things on my checklist of things I had to have was this word wall with all of these words that were up in first grade. Now, mind you, some of these kids couldn't even read. So here I am with all of these like pre-populated word walls that's preloaded with every term on day one. How was that relevant for them? How is that including them in the learning process? So when we add the words as students encounter them, maybe we're using it in their words, maybe we're using pictures that they draw, maybe we're using a connection to their home language, then it's building that shared ownership and it's developing their comprehension. So it's not just about what the word means, it's not just about it living on a wall, it's about being able to use it when they need to and why that matters. It's about helping them develop learning power. That's
Yeah,
a part of
that's
the
a
share.
simple little piece of advice for word walls and things. Don't don't overwhelm them with all the words at the beginning. Like as you encounter them, and make it maybe kind of a ritual out of like this. We have a new word, and now we're going to put it on the wall. Is that? Do you have a vocabulary wall, Hannah? And how do you interact with it with students? Right behind you.
It's on this side.
Yeah.
Yes. So as they come up, as the words are introduced to students, I add them and I like actually in the lesson, like as we are introduced to that word, students see me go and put the word up on the wall so that, sorry, I'm like confused, up over here so that they see that if they need to refer back to that, or if they need a reminder, if that word comes up again, I can continue to reference the inquiry wall and the word wall back there. Um, in like it's in the learning, it's not something that happens without them.
Right. Right. And I see you there working on that anchor chart, and that moment of creation is really important. And I've seen teachers wrestle with this, and I have myself. I'm in the middle of a conversation. I've got my anchor chart. A student, I'm collecting responses from different groups, and a student says something, and I'm trying to decide in my brain whether to write their wording or my version of their wording or what I want them to have said instead. Lakitha, can you talk a little bit about that, and then I'll let Hannah talk about it a little bit too.
I think that's sticky and I still struggle with that. I would say it's probably a balance, right? Like I don't it's a struggle because I want to honor what they say. And sometimes when we revise what they say, we may not always be interpreting it as they're thinking. Like maybe we are having a misconception. So first, I would say like make sure that we're actively listening, and being clear on the sense of ideas or concepts that you're listening for. But we're also modeling responsiveness. So when we revise a word together or clarify, again, just make sure you're not having a misconception as a teacher, clarifying the idea on a chart. We're also showing that the space isn't just for display, it's actually a process of reciprocal teaching and reciprocal thinking. And so the anchor chart can serve multiple purposes, not only just capturing the process and becoming of reference, but it's also when students can see themselves in the chart. And one like logistical kind of like strategy that I would sometimes use is I would have them write whatever their idea was on a post-it, and then I would have like the idea written in more like formal, clear language, and then still have the post-its underneath so they could see how we got to that more final or concrete idea that shows up on the anchor chart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Hannah, what is your experience in that moment? Could you maybe talk about a time when you're
Oh,
co-creating something and either how it shifted the learning or the decisions you made?
yeah. Well, I think that these anchor charts, especially in the inquiry journeys, they're meant to be used and we go back to them. So if your students don't understand what's up there, they're not really worthwhile anymore because they need to reference that anchor chart again, maybe on a checkpoint assessment or later on in a discussion. So if a student says something or if I have a plan and I only put what I think or I take it and put it in my own language, I have then changed it so I'm no longer sure if it even makes sense to my students. And so
Right.
sometimes I'll push deeper and ask for just, can you like explain that again? Can you restate that with more clarity? Or if they've talked with a partner, I might ask like, can you just explain what they said again to me just to make sure I understand? I do want to capture it in their language so that it's useful for them. And I also think that again is a chance to kind of honor their voice. And I have had times when someone says something and usually I try to pick out like one nugget or one word that I feel like I could grow the idea from. Maybe the whole idea isn't there, but they said one part of it and I can take that and kind of expand or ask someone to add on to that. So it's never a comfortable thing when someone says something totally off and you're like, oh, can we connect the dots to where we all need to go? That's definitely like a dance a little bit. But I do think that if a student is willing to share their idea and they want you to, that's them saying like, I want to add to this conversation. I want to add my thinking up there. So it is worth trying to find a way to get that onto the board.
Yeah. And I love what Heather said, I asked the student to clarify, which is what you said. And then ask the student if I can reword their statement. And if not, I record their original statement.
I love
That
that.
gives them, it's not taking away ownership from them. It's
Yeah.
like,
Or I
can
might
I
say like,
reword?
oh, sorry. I might say like, does this sound like what you were thinking or something like, am I getting at like, I'll almost put myself in like I'm not sure I'm understanding your idea is brilliant. Let me make sure I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
More from that angle.
So I just want to ask another question to our audience. I know we had you share ways in which and protocols and strategies, which is the one that has made the biggest impact in your classroom. So, it sounds like maybe for Hannah, it might be an anchor chart or it might be an inquiry wall but out there, what is the one that has made the biggest impact in your classroom and why? So I'll ask you that question while others respond, Hannah. Of all the things that you use, which has made the biggest impact, do you think, and why?
I definitely think the shared anchor chart. I also love this one with the post-its, the investigation question chart, because it grows across a whole inquiry. So it starts with a lot of questions, but then the questions, sometimes we move the Post-its have questions that the students have about the inquiry challenge statement. And so this one moves over time. Like when we feel like we have confirmation, we might move the question to the bottom since it's not really a priority anymore and we have an answer, or we can add more questions. So an anchor chart that actually has student writing on it, I think is probably the biggest impact.
Gotcha. Thinking maps, Ryan said, both for students' use individually, have been using them as a way to organize larger anchor charts, graphic organizers. For my virtual classroom, Padlet, quizzes, Pear Deck have been wonderful for student collaboration. With all the visual forms, it is the rich discussions that can be guided from them. That's great. Krista said, Kevin said, a visual chart can be static if not discussed. So let's talk about that one, because I think that's kind of where we're going as other people continue to share pictorial charts, things like that. I think what we mean by this last one is kind of what I think Kevin was getting at, learning that is shaped over time. And I would even say shaped, reshaped, shaped again, reshaped again over time. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lakithia, why this third part, shaped over time, is so important?
Yeah, shaped over time is critical. Not just pedagogically, but I would also say if we're pursuing cognitive justice, it's a mandate for us because it's not just a one and done event. Like you said, it's iterative, it's reflective, it's rooted in the belief that every single learner in your classroom has the capacity to grow their intellect. And so when we're making learning visible, we have to build in time and space to go back to the learning. Otherwise, like we've said a million times in this webinar, it just becomes decorative rather than developmental. And so one example I just want to state is that when students generate their questions at the start of a unit, sometimes we do like the K in the KWL or something like that, right? We're documenting this on an anchor chart. But if we don't actually take the time to return to those questions, then they lose meaning. And then we're also sending the message to our students that thinking is disposable or their thinking was invaluable or not. It was a waste of time. So shaped over time really is honoring the thinking of our students by coming back to it. We're giving them the opportunity to wrestle with something. We're giving them the opportunity to evolve their thinking. And so that's really creating the conditions for students to do really hard cognitive work of learning. Yeah.
Wow. First of all, thank you. That was quite a great answer. And I feel like there's a real call to action there. And Hannah, you have so there's a lot of different questioning protocols and a lot of different, different curricula, whether it's one that is created and that teachers are using that they purchase, or whether they create them as they're creating their own curriculum. There's a lot of different ways that questions are sort of generated at the beginning of an inquiry. And one way I know that we use a lot, and I think and you use in your classroom, is the question formulation technique. And the students generate those questions, and that's the questions that I see in the background, right? Can you tell me how you come back to those and how you revisit them so that it doesn't run the risk of what Lakithia said, that these questions are disposable or this was a one-off event, that it mattered?
So typically at the end of like a series of lessons or a collection, like a module, we'll go back to our original questions. I'll reread them and I'll ask students, which of these do you feel like we either have found an answer or gotten closer to an answer to? And then others, I'll say, which ones feel like pressing, or which ones are you now, maybe you have more, now that you've learned more about this topic, what like other questions have grown from that. And so we also will group the questions that are related to help like make thinking more visible. And you can actually not here, but in the one that's on the slide right now, you can see the way that those are grouped. kind of in a specific way. So after like a week or so, few lessons, when I feel like students have had time to dig into some content, then we'll go back and ask ourselves, which are we clear on and what do we want to add?
Yeah. I feel like I have a bigger picture, and this is from your room. And man, do I love this picture, because we see like even the perspective of it. We're at the students' backs, they're in front of this wall. I can imagine that as they are doing their work, they're also looking up there and they're using it as a reference. It's a really exciting example of visible learning here. And and I want you to tell us all about this inquiry wall here in a second. And I just want to define for everybody. I think we all can understand the concept of an inquiry wall, but Lakithia, can you give us just a brief definition? Because it's something that we use in our curriculum in every unit. Tell us what an inquiry wall is.
So when we see the inquiry wall as a dedicated space in the classroom that grows alongside the learning during a unit. So it usually starts with the compelling question for the inquiry or the unit, and then it builds as the teachers and the students add their anchor chart, they add the vocabulary words, they add sources and evidence from their investigations and their assignments. And so the power of this inquiry wall is that it doesn't stay static. It's movable in terms of the learning as they're gathering new information, or they're returning to an earlier idea or concept, or they're challenging their assumption or changing their initial idea, they're revising their thinking. This is how they're showing that their learning has deepened, and they're refining and they're adding layers. And so that ongoing shaping is what makes it really powerful for students, but also it's evidence of like the complexity of learning. And when students see that kind of growth, when they see their growth on the wall, it builds confidence and curiosity. And as a lower grade teacher, I mean, this is pre-COVID days. I don't know what it's like now, but I had a lot of parents in my classroom are coming to visit. It also is a living record for them as well to see, how we evolve over time in the classroom. And you can see these things right here in this photo from Hannah's classroom.
Yeah. Hannah, you want to talk us through a little bit about this inquiry wall we're looking at?
Sure. So it started with just that map in the middle, and it said inquiry wall. I leave that up all year. And then I put that map up before we had really started our Native America unit. So that's a map of the indigenous groups that they'll study soon. And then at the very beginning, we came up with questions, students generated questions around the statement, "We can better honor the cultural heritage of this land." And so then that became kind of the second piece on our inquiry wall. So this is, and then I'll keep going. This is near the end, but it has evolved and grown near the end of our inquiry. So then student work, that this all around the wall is students' work. Each group was researching a different indigenous group, and they learned a lot of information and shared it. And then after they shared it, I was like, we need to make sure we have a place where we can go back and remind ourselves, what did we learn about these groups, and make sure that we are honoring students and their efforts. So it went up there. And then throughout the inquiry, as well as different vocabulary words were introduced and became kind of part of our classroom vocabulary, it got added up onto the inquiry wall. And then to the right is a co-created anchor chart that we created over a number of days as students read more stories. We added some more things that we could learn about different indigenous groups from their stories. And then at the bottom, I added that because this activity, the very bottom is this, it's like students they answered a question. I don't remember the question, but they all gave an answer, and then they each stood up and read their answer. And then they were listening to see if they could connect their answer to someone else's. And then it was like this chain of connected ideas. And I don't think that is I just thought the activity was so cool, and to watch them, like to see how they felt connected to each other and how their learning was kind of connected. I'll keep saying that. I wanted to put that up there so that everyone could see how it was like just we went from one idea to the next. So this feels like a true representation of everything that we had dug into and discovered together, and kind of lives as a place where we can say we started with all these questions and look how much we discovered about that.
Yeah. I just want to put a plug into, because this is a fifth grade classroom, and I've seen amazing inquiry walls in first and second and third and fourth grade. I just want to put a plug in as a former high school student, or former high school. Yes, I was a high school student. As a former high school teacher, I taught ninth grade and 11th grade history, world history, and American history. I want to put a plug in that it doesn't only apply to elementary classrooms. I had my version of an inquiry wall when I taught social studies in both my American and world history classes. It's something that I actually pulled in from another discipline that I worked in, and we would say we're gonna. I remember a very specific one that was the world of pre-World War I, and the students. What happens when you create that with high schoolers is they can take a lot more ownership of the curation and the creation of the inquiry wall themselves, much more than younger elementary students. So by the end of this, there were propaganda poster analyses. There's the definitions of nationalism. There's illustrated analogies. There's poetry. There's all kinds of things. And what you're really doing in a high school classroom, as well as you are world building. In a way, you are building the world that you are studying, so that it is not only the record of thinking, it is not only seeing thinking made visible, but it allows students to step in to the context and the world that you are studying in the time period, and it can be really, really exciting. Lakeithia, we've covered a lot of ground, how visible learning makes student thinking seen, shared, and shaped. That's our definition about how critical it is for students to see their ideas evolve, to practice building that knowledge together. Can you speak to the mindset shift for students and teachers, Lakeithia? Why this shift to visible learning can be such a powerful mindset shift, especially as we think about giving students the skills that they're going to need to succeed in the future.
Yeah, I would say that if students understand that knowledge isn't fixed, knowledge isn't finished, and if they know and they have been empowered to build, to ask questions, to reshape, then they start to move into an investigative mindset, which I think is crucial, especially in a world that we see is very polarized, in a world that's constantly shifting. We have the development of AI. So when students see themselves as active meaning makers, as investigators, as researchers, they can lean into the questioning piece. They know that they're not passive recipients, then that's pushing them forward. That's building their learning power. And that's also equity work. So students who know how to reflect, students who know how to adapt and keep learning, those are the students who are going to thrive despite this uncertain future that we have ahead of us.
Hannah, I mean, you might see it in your classroom from beginning to end as you work with students and you see them grow and develop. What are those kind of skills that this visible learning builds?
I think the ability to help yourself find answers. I don't need to raise my hand and rely on always getting the answer from an adult. I can look around my world and see if I can figure out a way to solve my own problem or to spark my own curiosity. It's not maybe living inside of my phone or my iPad, but instead I can be a critical or an observant person who wants to explore what's around me, and knowing that my classroom space is meant to support my learning and my understanding, I think is valuable in many ways.
Hannah and Lakithia, thank you so much for spending time today and talking a little bit about visible learning.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Bye, everyone.